I'm going to miss the discount too.
I think that's the only thing that you miss about it, though.
Yeah.
We're recording now,
Okay.
and we are live.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and kick it off. I won't. I'll just clear my throat for the next hour and a half, apparently, is what I'm going to end up doing. Okay, here we go. And hello, and welcome to issue 560 of Geek in the City Radio. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron Duran.
And I'm one of your other hosts, Spinarita.
And I'm your other host, Cable Hashitani.
And this week, we are joined by the amazing artist on the other side of the world right now, Nicola Scott. Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Excited to have you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
I honestly thought this would be a lot harder to schedule with the time difference. And then I typed in the time and I was like, oh, no, it's not going to be a super weird time.
It's not too bad. Not too bad. I had to do a one of those DC fandom panels, but they were trying to schedule us all. There was London, there was New York, and there was LA, and there was me. And to accommodate everybody as best as possible, I drew the short straw, and I was awake at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Today?
That was rude. No, this was a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, okay. Because I didn't think that was I thought the fandom was coming out in a few weeks. Or is it just like recorded earlier?
I think it's coming out end of August. So there were a whole bunch of panels that were kind of pre-recorded. Don't know if I'm allowed to say that. I don't know why I couldn't.
I think so, because I've heard a few other creators mention that they've been recording stuff too. So I think as long as you don't talk,
there'll be a whole lot of live stuff as well.
Or you're gonna like a text message in about a day saying like, Nicola, why did you Yeah,
you're in trouble again.
Yeah, whatever. It's fine.
They have to hear this before they, went and did anything about it. You're probably fine.
Yeah, it'll be good.
Sure.
We're so underground.
Right. So for folks who may not be familiar with your work, you've done a lot of stuff for DC. So like Secret 6, Earth 2, Titans, and then of course your work with Greg on Wonder Woman. And then over on the Image side, your amazing creator-owned title, Black Magick, which we all just fucking adore over here.
Oh, thank you.
And issue 12 just came out last week, right? Of Black
Yes,
Magick.
That's right. That's right. Very excited. That was an issue that I painted. I swear to God, it was at least 2 years ago. It's been a slow go for this arc. There's just been a lot of other stuff on, particularly for Greg. He's had a lot of film and TV work on, lots of Hollywood stuff. So
he just doesn't seem that busy. Like he's not doing anything.
Yeah, he just sits around all day.
Get off your ass and do some work.
All he does are podcasts all fucking day long anymore.
Yep.
He's on all of them now.
Often. That's right. Oh my God, isn't he? He's got a publicity machine just grinding him up. But I think usually when scripts come in slow, whether it's at DC or it's with Greg on Marvel, I get very shirty because I get, as soon as I have a spare day, it's like I've got to fill this day because I have to keep my momentum going. But when they were going a bit slow a couple of years ago, and this is because like suddenly quite a lot of Hollywood stuff was winding up for Greg, and instead of getting sort of irritated by it or filling it with like, bits and pieces of DC stuff or whatever else was going, I was like, I never have time to do anything. What are the big things that we've been putting off for the last 15 years that, now might be a good time to do? And so we kind of got that stuff going. We have been talking about moving out of the city for 10 years, and we finally did that. And we have been talking about buying a house for 10 years. We finally did that. And just sort of like big things that take up quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
So, when I've had free time, I am not hassling anyone for more scripts. I'm not letting anyone know that I've got time. And just sort of, when a script comes in, I'm like, oh, I've got to work again. God damn it. When really I just want to play house.
I will have the same problem. I was like, but I could, I could just, I could try out this new recipe instead of working.
Yeah, right.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say,
Absolutely. There's been a lot of that.
what are your preferred domestic hobbies? Like cooking, crafts?
I'm a sort of old school DIYer, crafty person, so I can't have anything and not want to do something to it. So as soon as we bought this house, I was doing like a board and batten wall treatment on the living room walls, and we were painting every room. And currently I'm sort of discovering gardening, having sort of lived in apartments for the last 25 years. Having a garden to play with is very exciting. And
It's
getting
very
better
cathartic.
at cooking, going from having a little apartment kitchen to having like a reasonably decent sized house kitchen. It's like, oh gosh, I can start cooking stuff now, for real. But I also, I like to sort of make a lot of my soft furnishings and, give me a power tool and I'm very happy camper, be drilling into walls and customizing all kinds of shit. So, and, now that we own a house rather than we're renting, there's been a lot of stuff to do, and there's a huge list and it will take years, and I'm very happy about all of it.
There's always something when you have when you own a home, because it's always your responsibility. I know that there's a lot of like DIY projects you can do when you rent also, but once it's yours, there's it opens up more opportunities too, because you can like get into some structural changes if you really want to get crazy.
100%. And so, there's a whole list of things that are constantly getting reprioritized, whether or not we can afford to do them, whether or not I have time to do them, or whether or not something suddenly needs doing. And that's kind of a lot of fun. And the stress of it is a lot of fun too.
Yeah. It's funny. Now I'm imagining you just replying to Greg saying, like, take your time on the script. The tomatoes are coming in. So I'm good.
Oh, no, I'm not even bothering with that. He hates it because I'm just sort of disappearing. And he'll be emailing me saying, hello, are you still there? And I'm like, yes, I'm here. Just, just give me some script when you're ready.
No rush.
Don't worry about it.
Well, speaking of scripts, how's it feel getting back into Black? You said you drew it like 2 years ago, but
this issue, it is probably my favorite project to do. Like, apart from the fact that I love working on Greg's scripts anyway, I've been a big fan of his writing before we even met, which is, well over a decade ago now. But this project in particular, there's something, I think because, we're not under the monthly schedule that I was under at DC for a decade, that is in itself quite nice, that we can sort of, I want to have some discipline about it, but I don't feel like I'm grinding myself to the bone. But the sort of art of doing the story is the most creatively satisfying, and also when I was working at DC, which I was exclusively for 10 years, I was just penciling. And when I started, I had only sort of in the last year or so beforehand decided that I was just going to be a penciler, that I wasn't going to try and be a pinup artist, and I wasn't going to try and paint, and I wasn't going to try and do any of the things. I was just going to be a penciler, because that seemed to be where the most of the work was. And that seemed to be sort of like an interesting challenge, sort of really learning how to crosshatch and all that shit, and do interesting line weights and such, because comics were kind of new to me at the time. But then, I'm just penciling for like 10 years, and I kind of lost all of my other skills because there was no time to play with any of the other mediums that I have played with in the past. Right. And so when Greg and I were sort of talking about doing Black Magick, I just sort of started pulling out all of my old tools and buying bits and pieces of new tools just to sort of experiment with, to see what could be sort of interesting and challenging. And at the end of the day, it came down to probably the hardest one to do and the longest time to take, which is painting the book. But I liked the finish of it so much. And for me, there's something very, it's very emotional for me, because my mum taught me how to paint when I was little. And she was sort of my first and primary art teacher throughout my life. And she died a decade ago. And Rowan Black, our lead character, kind of looks a bit like my mum did in the 70s. She was sort of, you know, a little bit rock and roll, and she was quite beautiful. And I sort of purposefully designed Rowan to be a little bit of a mix between Linda Carter and my mum. And anytime we're in any of Rowan's domestic spaces, there's sort of exaggerated versions of the house we grew up in. You know, it's a much bigger, sort of grander version of the house that we grew up in. And a lot of the paintings on the walls are paintings of my mother's or paintings of my grandmother's. And so in the creating of the art, I'm sort of a little bit in communion with my mum, because she taught me how to paint. And because so much of what I'm putting on the page are sort of lessons from her, or paintings of hers, or furniture of hers. It's very nostalgic and very, very sort of emotionally fulfilling and feeding. And so therefore the doing of this book is just one of the most pleasant things to do. And I get to pencil and ink and paint in the one series, and we own it. And so, you know, there are so many factors that go into why this is really satisfying. But if I do a DC thing for a while and then I come back, just that sort of ability to just sort of draw a page, you know, and I work in batches, you know, sort of a few scenes at a time. That thing of just sort of being able to draw a page and then be able to sort of sit down and paint the page, there's something really pleasant about the experience. And it's good for my hands, it's good for my eyes. They just sort of get to exercise in slightly different ways every few days, rather than consistently the same way all day, every day. It was a really long answer to a short question.
It was great.
I actually really like that answer, because I think it really illustrates the difference when you're working with this book versus other books. You know, you were joking about, like, oh, don't worry about getting me script pages, take your time. As much as you might love working as an artist, it is still work, and sometimes that can be something to dread or want to put off. But there's the way you describe, you know, thinking about your mom and putting in all of those different elements from your childhood and your life into a piece of art that you do differently, in terms of technique versus some of your other works, is very, like, it's almost spiritual. Like there's definitely like a communion aspect to that, as you describe it, that I think makes it has to feel really special to work on.
Yeah, very much so.
I also like that your long explanation also explains to me questions I had when I was reading the issue that has both Rowan's mother and grandmother in it. And I kept looking at the design work, and I'm like, I've seen a lot of families in comics before. Very rarely do I see them actually depicted that they look like they're related. And you can see, like who you were drawing for Rowan still comes across in both the mother and grandmother. It's like I can see those familial resemblances in the way that you've drawn them. So that's a hell of a detail to put in.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, look, I'm sort of quite specific when I'm casting. You know, I'll sort of look for faces that give me the idea of what I want. I'm never trying to sort of make any of the characters look like a particular actor or look like a particular person, but just sort of giving myself some sort of structural foundation on which to then create faces that I can recreate panel after panel you know, at various different angles. You know, all artists kind of tend to repeat their faces over and over again. And, you know, I'm absolutely doing the same thing here. You know, Alex and Rowan and Morgan in particular are very much faces, you know, versions of faces that I do pretty often. But there are specifics about those three in particular that make them distinctly them and not the other versions of similar faces that I've done. And that is because I've kind of taken elements from real people that just sort of help to ground it a little bit, and keep it sort of interesting and challenging.
I've noticed that about your style. I always sort of just think about him as like the Nicola Scott facial bone structure that I think is very similar throughout some of your works, but you do still manage to give each character a separate identity, even though I'm like, that's a Nicola Scott face.
Yeah, thanks. Well, like, I think you would sort of, I think a lot of artists, the face that they're the most familiar with is their own. And so you will see elements of their own features sort of pop up, sometimes in the sort of reoccurring face shapes or nose shapes, the sort of the not as distinguishable features, you know, like eyes and mouths and eyebrows, you can be quite specific with, but the sort of, you know, I suppose you can with noses as well, but certainly on female faces where you don't want to be putting in too much heavy detailing and contouring, you tend to sort of draw what you know the most. And so I know a lot of my female characters are kind of versions of me, particularly at different ages, and versions of my mum at different ages. Sometimes my sisters are in there as well. And hilariously, one of my common guy faces, which Morgan is a version of, is almost exactly what my husband looked like at that age too. You know, when I met him, I was like, oh my God, I've drawn that face before. That's really weird. Just because he has the type of face that I draw quite a lot.
The most recent example that came to mind was when you did the variant cover for Lois Lane. I can't remember what issue it was, but it's something about the hair too. I always really enjoy the way you draw hair. It has a very it has a very alive feeling to it.
It's always in motion.
Yes, yes.
Which you don't see in a lot of art styles for sure.
Also, really,
it's such a wasted opportunity to not put movement in with hair. You know, when you're drawing static images, you know, a cape is a great opportunity to give sort of movement.
To say, if you don't have a cape, play with other things.
Yeah, exactly. Hair is a great opportunity to do that. And it doesn't really matter about how short the hair is. And to me, like Lois, I love Lois. She's one of my favorite sort of DC heroines. She will always, for me, be a little bit Margot Kidder, you know, because she was my Lois Lane growing up. There'll always be an element of that, but there's an actress that was sort of around mainly in the 90s is kind of when I'm remembering her from, though I'm sure she's done lots of stuff since. What was her name? It was something like Rena Sofa or something. I don't know that she was ever the star of something, but she was like a guest actress in everything. And she just sort of had that very glamorous but smart look that was sort of like a more modern, slightly rounder-faced version, fuller-faced version of Margot Kidder's Lois Lane. And I thought she was always a good modern Lois.
I totally just found her. Yeah, it's Rena Sofer.
Yeah,
and I could completely see it.
I'm thinking 90s version of her.
Yeah.
I think I saw her in something and she just sort of had like a good bob with bangs. And it was just sort of like, yep, you look like Lois Lane.
Yeah, I totally see that.
That brings us to a pretty good listener question. Ace is asking, how did you figure out your style to a way to the point where you became like it became your consistent look? And the reason they're asking is because they have a friend. Oh no, I'm sorry, I misread that. They're trying to find their style right now, and are just sort of looking for advice on how to develop that consistency and your like signature look.
Sure. I think it kind of evolves over time, and it certainly starts with what influences you. So, you know, certainly the kind of art that I gravitate towards, whether it be sort of fine art or comic book art, there are the things that there are sort of lots of different art styles that I really like, but the ones that kind of speak to me in a way that I feel like that's what I would like to kind of replicate or be in the same family as, I can find that style in almost any era of art. And so a lot of it starts out when you're sort of early days with art and you haven't yet found your own style. What you're starting with is kind of imitation. You're sort of taking the elements of the people or the artists whose work really speaks to you, and you try to sort of find what it is about it that is doing that talking. What it is specifically about it that is triggering you in a creative and interesting way. And that often starts with just sort of imitating. And eventually you just sort of taking all of these elements and just through repeating over and over and over again, which is just that thing of, you know, lots of practice, you eventually start to sort of refine what is actually you, and you start to discard what is not you. And it just comes with time. It really just does come with time. And even then, you know, like I draw every day pretty much. I will still have days where I'm drawing and I'm just like, I can't draw today. You know, my faces don't look right. I can't make them look like my faces. Sometimes they'll look like a different artist. Sometimes they just don't look right. They just don't look right. And so when I'm having days like that, especially when I've got a hard deadline that I have to just push through on, I'll pull out a page where there are no faces on it, or there's few faces on it, and it's all sort of background, you know, any kind of big establishing shot where you have to draw, you know, 3-point perspective buildings. That's a good thing to draw on a day when you can't kind of find yourself artistically. And those days are not common anymore, but they're regular. Bless you. Here it comes. But they're regular enough to not feel freaked out about them anymore. You know, when they happen, they're just frustrating. And it's like, oh, well, what the fuck else can I draw? Okay, this page has a giant Batmobile on it. Let's draw a Batmobile, you know? And that is a sort of slightly different headspace, you know? The difference between drawing something mathematically and drawing something organically is a sort of slightly different hemisphere.
That makes a lot of sense.
That's a great answer.
Has there ever been as like a potential like exercise, do you ever try to draw in different styles, not maybe copy a different artist, but kind of challenge yourself to kind of play with other styles or other ways you would design a character or a location? Yeah.
I find that pretty much any time I start a new title, new to me title, is a really good opportunity to shake it up in one way or another. You know, it's still me, it's still my style. I think you can see from, you know, my DC work from Birds of Prey through to like Earth 2 or Wonder Woman, that there are consistencies that make it recognizably my art. But I think you can also see from title to title, there are slightly different approaches. And a lot of that will come from, you know, what is the book? What is the tone of the book? What is the writer trying to achieve with the book? You know, probably the biggest contrast would be maybe between Teen Titans and Earth 2, because I kind of finished Teen Titans and then went straight on to Earth 2.
Right.
And when I started Earth 2, it was, what had I been doing before that? I'd sort of done some filling on Superman and such, but I think, before Teen Titans, I'd done Blackest Night Wonder Woman.
I was about to ask you if that was right around, the Blackest Night stuff.
Yeah, it was kind of like a decade ago. And Blackest Night Wonder Woman, I knew I'd gone from Secret Six to Blackest Night Wonder Woman, and I knew that I was going from kind of like a goofy book to a serious book, and from sex, drugs, and rock and roll to horror. And so it was like, okay, I need to, and I'm also going from a bunch of D-listers to an A-lister. And so it was like, okay, I need to. Also
in the middle of an event.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's yes, it's got to fit into an event. So it's Wonder Woman in a very non-Wonder Woman story. And so the way you draw a character, it's not just, their body language and stuff, but how you choose to angle at a character is very different for a D-lister to an A-lister. You want an A-lister to look like the ultimate in superpowered awesomeness. And the Secret Six, I wanted them to look like they were hungover all the time. So, it's a very different camera approach as well as body language approach. And when I started on Teen Titans, I was very conscious of how sometimes the Teen Titans are drawn to look like 3/4 size adults. They just look like adults, but they're slightly shorter and narrower. And it's like, that doesn't cut it for me. Teenagers have a different body type to some, a 17-year-old doesn't look like a 27-year-old who doesn't look like a 37-year-old, even if it's the same person. Your body changes. And so it was like, I want them to look like they're about 17, 18. And I wanted to not put in so much shadow. So, in Blackest Night Wonder Woman, there'd been lots of shadow and there'd been lots of cross-hatching and lots of texture and all that kind of stuff. And I just wanted Teen Titans to be sort of lighter and brighter and cleaner and such. And then going from that to Earth 2, Earth 2 was grittier and way more detailed, and I wanted to kind of emphasize musculature, so I was putting in sort of quite heavy shadows on the abs and stuff, which I don't think I was doing at all on Teen Titans.
It was a very sexy Alan Scott.
Oh, thank you very much. I went out of my way to make him as sexy as possible. But yeah, it is, while it's still my art style, you do need to consider what it is that what your finished product needs to achieve. And it needs to serve the title, it needs to serve the characters, and it needs to serve the tone of the story in front of you as much as possible. Otherwise, it's just you just blasting your ego all over everything. And I'm way more interested in sort of finding out what it is that the writer is trying to achieve, or we negotiate between us, what do we want this to look like? Certainly, when Greg and I did Wonder Woman, if we'd done Wonder Woman 5 years earlier, we probably would have done something a little more serious and a little more gritty and realistic, and I would have approached the art quite differently. But because we were doing it in 2016, and because it was an origin story, and because of a whole lot of things, I just wanted the art to be light and bright and all ages accessible to a degree, and slightly sweet, just sort of a little bit goofy, while still being quite emotionally resonant. And so again, I kind of laid off the heavy shadows. I put some texture here and there, But, you know, in one panel I had like love hearts floating around Steve Trevor's head. I've never done that before. And I can remember saying to Greg, I want to do this. I know it's really dumb. What do you think? And he was like, oh my God, do it. That's hilarious. And we just wouldn't have done it 5 years ago if it was a different time and a different tone.
Right. Yeah, I remember reading the Rebirth stuff. Your art definitely like it revealed like a Diana that was, you know, so very new to, you know, man's world. There was an innocence and a naivete, but never ditzy, which I feel like would have been an easy trap to fall into.
Yeah, I can't
yeah.
stand that kind of bullshit. It's like, you know, naive isn't ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, naive is just, you know, you're out of your element. That's all. But she's still wise.
Right.
And she's still willing to put her feet down, even being outside of her element. You know, she stands up for
100%.
You know, what she believes is the right course of action. You reminded me of the super whimsical. It was a cover page, if I remember correctly, not like in the issue, but it's Wonder Woman in a jail cell with like birds coming in through the window, like the Disney princess shot.
Yeah, so Greg calls it the Disney princess cover. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, I Greg and I kind of talked about that cover because I drew that because we were in Portland for the summer of that year, and I think I did that cover while we were there, and we were kind of talking about having this sort of moment of her being a Disney princess because, you know, we discussed that we didn't want to see the gods sort of actually present themselves, that we wanted to sort of indicate their presence by showing, you know, their sort of patron animals and such. And it just sort of made us laugh. And, you know, Greg isn't often up for sort of doing funny, silly things in his books. You know, he's quite serious. And Wonder Woman is a character that we both take quite seriously. But there was just sort of this series in particular just sort of required charm. And that was just a sort of delightful way to sort of convey that to the audience.
Since you mentioned Greg, I want to double back a little bit. One of our listeners was curious, like between, because Greg has so many different projects that he's working on. So between you and Michael Lark, oh my God, I'm not going to remember everyone's full names, but Fernandez, Greenwood, everybody that is in active projects along with you on Greg. Do you guys have like a system? Do you guys kind of like have scheduled rotations on when you work with Greg? When is it your turn with Greg?
Oh, I think it's when Greg has time or when whatever is the most pressing with Greg. You know, I don't know that I've even met everybody. And we certainly sort of don't all communicate on a regular basis. Because, you know, artists generally tend to be not busier than writers, because that's bullshit. But our job is really time consuming, where a writer's job actually requires quite a bit of time of not writing, you know, to let ideas marinate and gestate and such. Where artists, our job tends to be from the moment we have a script, we've got the ideas rolling, and it's just very time consuming. And so, you know, Greg's got his Slack forum, and I don't know how many artists are on it. It seems to be a lot of writers. So yeah, it's entirely up to Greg, and I'm pretty sure especially when he's busy, it comes down to what's the next fire that needs putting out. So-and-so's been waiting the longest, or so-and-so's the next up in line. Let's get them a script. And, you know, because he's got all of these projects marinating all the time. And obviously he does need to sit down and sort of execute those ideas onto paper. for us to then do our bit. But I don't think if there's any coordination going on, it's going on in his head.
That does kind of give me like a little follow-up question to that. Obviously with Black Magick, it must be a little different because it's co-owned by you. But how much of the story when you work on a book do you like to know ahead of time? Like I know, like hearing from like I've spoken with Michael Lark a few times at shows, and he kind of likes to be surprised.
Yeah, and Greg likes to surprise. So, you know, I'm not 100% sure if Greg does this with the other artists, but I'm absolutely sure he does, because he's probably the most collaborative writer I've ever worked with. You know, he wants to talk through the bigger ideas and themes quite a lot. And sometimes before actually sitting down to write the script, he'll want to talk to you again because it will help him focus. And he wants to, it is very collaborative. And especially sort of in the early days of Black Magick, we would get on like Skype sessions for hours when we would sort of break down the minutiae of something, especially when it came to like Rowan's doing a spell. So what is the nature of this spell? What is, you know, we would go as big and as broad and as abstract as possible so that we could narrow it down to she's going to pull out a pocket knife and she's going to carve into a Zippo lighter, you know, and this is the rune that she's going to carve. Because Rowan's a very sort of fly by the seat of her pants kind of witch, you know, she's sort of like, what have I got in my pockets that I can do magic with? She's not sort of into all the sort of ceremony of things terribly often. So we will spend a lot of time thinking big so that we can come to something small. And so Greg and I will sort of talk about, and he'll sort of say, this is kind of what I'm thinking. I'm too in my head about it. What do you think of this? And we'll discuss it to a degree. And then he goes off and he takes the sort of the abstract and he narrows it down. And he does always like to keep a few surprises in the script so that when I read it, I'm just sort of like, what the fuck? We didn't talk about that. Or that was a really surprising conclusion to a situation that I did feel like I had a good understanding of. And I kind of knew what the result would be, but how he got there is surprising, you know. So he does like to surprise, and I like to be surprised. But at the same time, before getting to that point, there's quite a lot of communication.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I was curious about is if, as an artist, do you prefer, that style, or sometimes you're like, and maybe it's different on a work for hire job, but you're like, look, just give me the script. I'll just go.
Yeah, look, it depends on how familiar you are with the writer. You know, there've been some projects that I've worked on where it's like, oh, we're not necessarily a good team. I feel like I can do a good job for this writer's requirements, but we think very differently about narrative. Sometimes, you know, I'm sort of teamed with a writer that I think is a great match, but and we're not communicating, you know, they're just sort of delivering scripts. And like the final issue of a story of like an arc will be paced well, and then the last couple of pages is like, here's half an issue's worth of information in like the last 3 pages. And it's like, well, you didn't pace that out very well. That's shit. Now I've got to do the work of making it paced out better by sort of shuffling shit around or whatever, you know. So it's very different relationship writer to writer. Sometimes, you know, I'll get a script from a writer that I've never met on a character that I've never worked on, and just sort of in doing my research and sort of trying to understand the intent of the tone of the story, I can sort of feel like I'm getting there. I did a story, who wrote it? Was it Ron Mars? It was somebody. Oh God, I'm probably stuffing it up. This is ages ago. This is like 15 years ago. And it was like a season 5 of Angel story about Illyria. So when Fred becomes Illyria, it was kind of a one-shot story about her. And was it romance? I can't remember who wrote it now. God, that's terrible. And I'd never met the writer. I hadn't watched the show, so I had to sort of binge season 5 of Angel, and then sort of, you know, binge the rest of it while I was working, just to sort of get an idea of who she was. And by the time I got to the sort of climactic moment, it's quite an emotional moment for a very non-emotional character. I had to sort of achieve an emotional state without sort of giving her facial expressions. It was very strange. And so it was all about body language. And it was probably about 7 years later that I finally met the writer. And he said to me, "Oh my God, you drew that Illyria issue. I love that issue. You nailed that moment." And I was like, "Oh, thank God." You know, that's really nice to hear, especially in retrospect.
And it was, it was Peter David.
It was Peter David. That's right. Oh my God, right. Of course. I actually met him at a convention in Australia when Greg was out here. And I was sitting with Greg going, "I've done a job with him. And apparently he's sort of notoriously angry person or something. I don't know." I think lots of artists had warned me, you know, don't get excited about meeting this guy because he can be, oh, no, you know, pretty intense. And he was so nice to me. It was really quite a nice surprise.
That's cool.
Better than the other way around, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So I'm curious, and like you might already have something in the works for this or not, but I know that there was a point in your career where your sort of like dream book was to do Wonder Woman. And then later evolved into like Wonder Woman origin story with Greg Rucka, and now you've done that and then some. Like you've covered the superhero universe pretty handily at this point. Do you have a new sort of rung that you're reaching for as like a dream job in the comics industry?
I think when it comes to like there are favorite characters that I haven't really had enough chance to play with or any chance to play with yet that I would love to do. And there are sort of tones of story that I would like to sort of have a bit more of a chance to play with. But when it comes to a sort of like a specific dream project, not particularly, because I feel like Wonder Woman and Black Magick are probably like the peak of my fantasy, you know, dream scenarios, in that Wonder Woman was the reason why I decided to draw comics in the first place. And she was the first sort of fictional character. She was the first character in any context that resonated with me when I was little. And that's probably sort of quite why I haven't grown out of her, because she was the first one and she's it. You know, everything is but measured by her. And so the importance of the dreaminess of that dream project was so significant and so huge that the fact that it has become a reality is quite overwhelming. And now I'm just sort of like, well, what now? The what now is kind of the opportunity to not feel so overburdened by my passion for something, because that was actually a really tricky job to do. As exciting as it was to get it, especially under the parameters of what we had, you know, which was pretty open, and the fact that I got to do it with Greg, the fact that Greg and I had spent a decade talking about this, you know, there was so much excitement and sort of perfect ingredients going into it, but the doing of it was so emotionally taxing and overwhelming, because it's one thing to sort of fantasize about your dream job, but then to actually have the restrictions of doing it. Therefore, you know, Greg and I talked in a sort of incredibly ephemeral way for such a long time, but then to sort of say, okay, we have 6 issues of 20 pages each. These are the beats, you know, these are all of this stuff we just have to forget about because it's just not going to fit in. We're not doing an ongoing, here's where we get to sort of, you know, we're not doing a series, we're doing a movie. So we have to be very specific about what we're going to tell, how we're going to tell it, all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of ideas just don't fit in with what we're doing. So we just have to do what we're doing. And then even within that, it's like, well, anytime I'm drawing a splash page or the first time I'm drawing her in costume or it just anything, I'm drawing the competition is a huge thing to me. I'm designing what Steve Trevor's going to look like. Anything that has any emotional resonance to me has kind of a little too much emotional resonance. And therefore it's impossible to feel satisfied with anything because in my head, it's always better. You know, in my head, I've got the music going. In my head, I've got the movement. I've got, you know, you've got the whole movie in your head, but in front of me, I've just got the fucking piece of paper and my markers, and I've got to kind of achieve all of that in this sort of static moment. And I found doing that book was incredibly overwhelming, and I spent most of my time going, I can't wait until this is over. And I can just be really happy that I've done it because it's not the most pleasant thing to be doing. It was so wonderful to do, and it was so exciting to do, but it was also just really overwhelming to do.
It's like that.
So
joke
now
of
anything,
like, you know,
anything's a
right.
breeze.
It's like that joke of like being careful to get what you want because then you have to do it.
Then you have to do it. And it is 100% that, especially when all the ingredients that you fantasy version of, you can't just sort of, if you fail at it or if you feel like you failed at it, you can't blame it on the ingredients not being there because all the ingredients were there. And so, you know, I am really happy with the results, but 100% there are things on probably every page that I would change, you know, given some distance from it. Like I love the book, and I love that it's had so much sort of resonance with people, and I love that DC keeps sort of reprinting it, and that it has become sort of like their standard for Wonder Woman at the moment, which is really flattering and really lovely. And you know, that's part of the fantasy of your dream project, is that it gets to have this shelf life and have this meaning for readers. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that I don't look at it and find where I could have done better or done different.
And is it weird little minuscule stuff? You're like, oh God, look at her left foot there. What was I thinking?
100% things that no one else would say.
Right. Every artist I've ever known.
You know, there are also panels that I'll look at and I'll just go, that panel, that's perfect. That is perfect, just the way it is.
That is a nice feeling, though.
It is a very nice feeling.
It is a quite the burden to bear, knowing that DC is saying this is our go-to origin story now, since within our lifetime it has been, I think the last time they did that where it was that solidified was George Perez.
Yeah, that was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And you know, Superman and Batman have had their origin stories retold every, you know, half an hour. You know, if she's part of this trinity, I think this is kind of why they, you know, DC kind of came on hand and knee to Greg, was because they've always understood how important she is to their own pantheon of characters, but also and the hierarchy of their characters, but also just to the world at large. They've understood how important she is, but they haven't always done the best at sort of shepherding her stories.
Yeah.
And sort of corralling the various writers' directions of the character. You know, Superman and Batman, while there have been sort of, you know, some great Elseworld stories or, you know, some great, you know, non-continuity stories, but sometimes even in-continuity stories that are really interesting. They don't always service the character in the best way. Where Superman and Batman are almost always serviced in as best way as possible. And
Mhm.
so what happens with that is that the richness of the Superman and Batman lore becomes denser and more, you know, evocative, and there's so much more meat on the bone, where with Wonder Woman, every time they play with it, they're sort of shredding stuff and not feeding into what's there, but just sort of going, oh, I don't get it, so I'm going to do this. And, you know, it was kind of really exciting and special for DC to say to Greg, we understand how important she is, and we understand that, particularly in this year of her 75th anniversary and the movie about to come out and all of these things, it's like, this is the one time that we really can't afford to fuck it up. And you're the person that we're going to go to, because we know that you're the one person who absolutely cannot fuck it up. You won't. So, you know, how do you and Nicola feel about coming to do this? And, you know, that in itself is incredibly flattering.
Yeah. It's probably that great feeling of like, I get to do it. And then you hang up the phone and think, oh shit, I get to do it.
Yeah, well, I was
What
like
did I
halfway
just say
through
yes
a
to?
page of Black Magick. And, you know, Greg called me immediately after his first meeting to say, so this just happened. And, you know, and I'm like, so what does that mean? And he was like, we're starting now. And they're announcing in like 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever it was. It wasn't very long. Maybe it was 10 days. I can't remember, but it wasn't very long. And so it was like literally like having to rejig the brain from like, I'm in the middle of doing a page in the middle of a scene of Black Magick, and I just have to put it away for a year and go, right, Wonder Woman, I draw her all the time, but now I have to decide exactly what she's going to look like in this version. So what are we doing? And it was very quick, but it was also very exciting and terrifying.
So before we jump over to chatting more about Black Magick, just a quick little like superhero question. Is there, or really any character in pop culture, but is there a superhero character that people might be surprised to learn you've had an itching to kind of draw for and you haven't had the chance yet?
Ooh. I've never really had a chance to play with Selena Kyle, with Catwoman.
Oh, that'd be fun.
And she's one of my favorite characters. And while I've sort of made a point of being, you know, one of the few go-to artists for sexy men, I don't often get a chance to draw sexy women, you know, because I'm not an artist that will go, okay, it's a woman, so she's sexy. You know, I want my Wonder Woman to be beautiful, but she's not wearing a bathing suit for the male gaze. She's wearing warrior armor, and you know, I'm very particular about where I apply my sex appeal to both male and female characters. You know, I'm not going to draw Superman showing his butt off, but I'll go to town on Dick Grayson.
Okay,
as long as we're getting
should.
somebody's ass.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some characters where it's really appropriate, and there are some characters where it's really not. And I've never sort of had a chance to really draw and dive into a sort of sexually empowered woman character, really. You know, the female characters that I have drawn that are sexy are very sort of male gaze sexy, like Vampirella or whoever. And even then I've only done like a cover or two. And she's someone who I feel like sex appeal is part of her bag of tricks. You know, she's very in control of what she's doing and how she's doing it. And there's something very specific about that, especially coming from a female artist. And I think you can see it in, you know, the female artists that have drawn her in the past, that the sex appeal that she has when drawn by them is a little different to the sex appeal that she has when she's drawn by men. So
case in point, the work Joelle Jones has been doing with the character.
100%.
Yeah.
You know, Joelle is probably my go-to Catwoman artist because she's really got that that understanding of how sexy she should be, while not sort of sending her necessarily into pinup land, where I don't think she has any fucking interest in being, you know. It's so fine an understanding, but I feel like her Catwoman is probably exactly where I would try and aim myself as well, because I think her art is just beautiful. And Tula Latte as well, you know, that they just do sort of such just mind-blowingly gorgeous art.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's a certain amount of elegance to Joelle's Catwoman that I don't think I'm used to seeing from any of the films or any of the other artwork that I've seen for that character.
Yeah, really, really, absolutely. I think, you know, probably the closest that I think has come to, and it's probably, you know, one of her big influences as well, is when Darwin Cook sort of reestablished her, you know, nearly 20 years ago, 15 years ago, whenever it was.
God, that long ago?
You know, his version of Catwoman was kind of like, okay, that's exactly who Catwoman should be. You know, it sort of defined her style and defined her look for, you know, up until now. That was perfect. And I feel like what Joelle was doing is the sort of great modern version of that. And so she's a character that I'd like to play with.
Yeah.
Kind of anyone in Gotham City. I kind of love all the Gotham City characters because they are so sort of iconic and hilarious and ridiculous and sort of well conceived while also being quite over the top.
They're all a little, this may not be fair, but they're all a little broken in a special way that makes them kind of fun to write and draw.
Yeah, including the heroes, you know, the heroes and the villains. They're all a little, you know, just mirror versions of each other. And I kind of love how sort of subtle as well as extreme they can be. And it's a very fun world to play with. It doesn't at all surprise me that it's, you know, the peak of comicsdom.
I'm also now kind of imagining you on a Catwoman and Nightwing team-up book where they both kind of acknowledge that they're both incredibly sexy, but there's also that thing where she's like, man, I've known you since you were like 13, though. This is this is going to be a little weird, kid. And he's like, I can see that kind of fun with that, like a caper type story with those.
Yeah, you filled out.
That would be a great miniseries.
Yeah,
that would be pretty fun.
Alfred fed you really well, Dick. You know,
some gender swapping adultification there.
Absolutely.
So talk to us about this new arc for Black Magick. The first you know, collection is really about world building and getting to know Rowan and the other characters and like learning a little bit about how she uses her craft. Well,
the first sort of volume, the hardback volume, which is the first two trades, that is really about sort of introducing us to this witch that we're giving the sense that she's got a lot more going on in terms of her history and her age and her potential and how she's really not participating in it terribly much. And how there are sort of nefarious forces kind of poking and prodding her to activate a little bit. And this arc, this sort of 5 issues that are in the process of coming out, that will be joined by the next lot, 17 to 21, I'm presuming, will be essentially the second act of the story, because the whole thing is going to be about 30 to 32 issues, I think, once we're all said and done.
Right.
Yeah, so we're kind of entering into the second act of the story. And there's been a little bit of a time jump from the end of issue 11. And
because it was Halloween and then now it's May.
Yeah.
Like we went from
I think
Samhain to
about
Beltane.
6 months have gone by.
Yep.
And what's happening now is that Rowan kind of has activated a little, but a bit sort of randomly and irresponsibly, and it's not being directed. It's just a little self-serving. She's kind of falling off the edge a little bit. And this issue, this arc, these sort of five issues are kind of about that sort of looseness that she's suddenly got going on in terms of how she's approaching her magic, being sort of pushed a little closer to the edge, little by little, as she's getting more and more isolated from her support network. So that's essentially what this arc is about. And you can kind of see it in the first issue, in issue 12.
You
Yeah,
definitely get that vibe of like she's been through some shit, she's not processing it, and so she's starting to show, like, just like the beginning of some self-destructive behavior.
100%. And she's been there before, after her mum died. She's been there in terms of how she's dealt with her magic. After her initiation ceremony, her awakening ceremony, when she was 13, she kind of went a little bit off the edge then and became a little self-destructive. She's kind of been in a stasis mode of not really developing and not participating and just kind of barely being present with her witch attributes. In the very beginning of the first issue, we see a sort of pagan Wiccan magic circle that we return to at the beginning of issue 12. No one else in that circle besides Alex is actually capable of the kind of magic that they are. None of them have the same kind of magical history and hereditary that they do. Mm-hmm. They're just sort of, practicing Wiccans, or they're practicing pagans, or they're nudists, or they're just sort of fringe dwellers who found this circle that essentially Alex conducts so that she's got enough people for the primary ceremonies, the primary sort of lunar cycles. She's got enough people in a circle to sort of do the ritual its justice. But beyond that space, I don't think any of these people are great friends that hang out all the time. But Rowan and Alex have a very long history. They've come together sort of in this lifetime to support each other, to kind of be there for each other. And Rowan is kind of being a bad friend. And, Alex can't sort of rely on anyone else in the circle to sort of assist her with Rowan, because none of them really have any idea what's going on with Alex and Rowan in terms of their power capability and their history and their ability with magic inherently. And so, yeah, this issue, this arc has a lot to do with their relationship as much as it does with Rowan's relationship with Morgan. Just getting, they were her two support pillars. And in this arc, they barely cross paths. And you can see how Rowan is not coping with not having those pillars around her.
Whose idea was it to give her that edgy new haircut?
Mine. So I gave her this sort of Joan Jett haircut from the beginning. I kind of wanted her to have something that was kind of witchy and long, but just not long black hair, because that was going to bore me shitless if there was just yet another, long black hair, leather jacket wearing chick. It was just sort of too boring. And
the shag is great
giving
for
her
that.
an interesting silhouette. And I feel like the haircut that she's currently got in the book in issue 12 is just the fresher, shorter version of what she had. You know, it's really just I wanted her to be a little more aggressive looking. So I've shortened her bangs. I wanted to be able to see her eyebrows a bit more, for the sort of expressive nature of her eyebrows. And I wanted to make the haircut just sort of a little more decidedly tough. So while it's still got the sort of long bits, because I want it to sort of have some movement, and I want it to still be a little bit sort of out of time and a little bit witchy. Having the sort of undercut and the shorter bangs just makes her look a little harder. And at some point it will grow out again. But at the moment, you know, these 5 issues take place over only a few days. And it just sort of really serves the purpose that she looks a little meaner.
It's a good visual cue that basically says, just leave me alone. Like,
yeah, 100%. And, you know, Morgan's growing in his dad beard, and, you know, he's sort of underslept and undershaved, not maintaining his perfect stubble. But, yeah, just sort of letting some of the characters evolve a little bit.
How much... some of the pagan elements of the book, how much research do you do on that? Because there's been previous issues where I've noticed like a lot of rituals and stuff.
So much research.
Yeah, that I would actually recognize different like pagan traditions in the background. I'm like, oh, this is not someone that's just Googling witch, and it's like, you know.
Yeah. No, which is a kind of my occult genre of choice. You know, I've been sort of fascinated and attracted by the idea of witches since I was quite young. And I can remember sort of this moment when I was maybe like 13 or something, discovering that there were actual practicing witches in the world. And you can't say the same thing about vampires and werewolves, and, you know, unless they're crazy people. Witchcraft is something that's kind of, to some people it's real because it's like a religion, and it's a practice. It's a lifestyle, and that made it even more fascinating to me. And I didn't grow up in a religious family at all. We have no religious discipline at all. But I feel like if I did have some religious discipline, I would currently be a witch, because everything about it speaks to me. I just don't have the discipline to do anything about it. You know, I've read all of the books. You know, I buy lots of books. You know, in this sort of day of social media where there's sort of Instagrams and Pinterests and Etsy shops and all that kind of shit for witches, and podcasts and everything. I dive deep into all of it because it all fascinates me. And I love that really it's essentially about creating. It's creating. And so I feel like it speaks to me because I'm creating art all the time. It's a similar kind of manifestation. And so all of that makes a lot of sense to me. And I've got, you know, shitloads of witchy accoutrement because I love it all. It's all just sort of beautiful stuff. I've got it all. I just don't have the discipline to, you know, run around in my garden on a full moon.
It has definitely never been like a more, I don't want to say easier time to practice kind of a more witch ways, but I do remember in high school, you basically had, what's her name? Silver Wolf, and that one, there were like 2 books. Like that was it. There was nothing else out there.
Yeah.
Silver Fox.
Well,
Silver Fox.
Now there's a lot of info and a lot of understanding and a lot of, you know, I feel like in the 90s, witchcraft sort of became quite commercialized. There were lots of sort of books and stuff. And so anytime I'm looking for research material, I'm trying to find stuff that kind of predates the mid 80s, you know, anything that's older than that tends to have come from sort of earlier commitments. And I find like a lot of the new material that the kids are dealing with now, a lot of that is based on this older stuff as well. So yeah, there was a sort of period in the 90s where it just sort of felt a little commercial, which wasn't my fave, but it's there's so much sort of rich and interesting stuff being created now.
I believe that to the degree that in the 90s they did both a Complete Idiot's Guide and Witchcraft for Dummies.
Yeah, exactly. It's that kind of thing, or it's just like, no thanks. No, I'll do without that.
The crafts was a really big deal for introducing more people to the concept of witchcraft, even if it was maybe not necessarily the best depiction in terms of like what could possibly go wrong.
It was a perfect depiction of girlfriends playing with the idea of magic, though. You know, that's sort of first half of the movie is kind of perfect because, you know, that's what we were all doing as teenagers.
Who didn't have that period in the 90s?
What? Yeah, no shit. And I was in my 20s in the 90s. So, you know, I was sort of a little too old to be a teenager when it came out, but it made me very nostalgic for when I was a teenager. Going, oh my God, yeah, when I went through my goth phase at 13, that was exactly what I was doing.
Fun fact, Rachel True of The Craft is an actual witch.
Yeah.
I think
even before Rachel
Mhm.
True was into witchcraft before she did the film, though.
Yes.
Whereas Fairuza Balk became interested because she did the film.
Right.
And
that's fascinating.
And I knew that because of a podcast that my partner introduced me to called Witch Wave, which Nicola was also on.
Oh, yeah.
I listened to that too. And the first one I ever listened to was the Nicola one.
Oh, yay. Yeah, it's a great podcast.
Pam
and as you
Grossman
can see, almost everyone that she interviews, somewhere along the line is an artist. You know, they're a writer or they're an artist or they're creating
designers
for their magic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that just sort of it made me feel like, oh, maybe I am a little bit of a witch. You know, because I tend to sort of think that of myself, but I would never have the audacity to call myself.
You say that, but you do spend a lot of time both like working in a ritualized manner, and also you have manifested things in your life. So I think that anyone who considers themselves a witch would look at you and confirm that you are in fact, in your own way, pretty witchy.
And
which I think almost all witches are. I don't think there's a witch in the world that's actually celebrating every full moon, because that's exhausting.
And I definitely like to kind of back up what Denise says. Like, I definitely see it in your work, even just in the color choices in Black Magick. Everything has very much an elemental look to it, has an elemental palette. Like one page will have, earth tones, and you'll see it like flow into water tones and then fire work its way in. Like, it's a very, just on a visceral level, it connects on a very elemental vision to it. And that's definitely something that like drew me when I initially saw the book. I was like, oh, even visually there's something completely different happening in this comic.
I think
that's great. That makes me really happy, because that's exactly what we're doing. I'm very control freaky about how everything looks at the end of the day, because I've got a very firm idea of what magic would look like if we could see it.
Mm-hmm. Although, speaking of that, so you said it's all watercolor. Is there any kind of digital enhancement that goes once it goes to print, or I was just curious?
The color itself is digital, except for at the end of issue 11, or sort of midway through issue 11, Rowan goes to color for a little bit, for a few panels, for a few pages that I painted. But beyond that, almost all the magic that you see on the page that's in color, that's all digital.
Right.
But pretty much everything else is painted. Just because I'm a control freak and I can't let it go, and I'm not very good at the digital stuff. That's where I get Kiara in, who does all the sort of digital magic color for me. And, sometimes I'm very specific. I'm like, I need this spell to look a little bit like a nebula, and in this kind of color spectrum, and that's too much. You know, it's got to be way more subtle, way more subtle, way more subtle. And other times when, like in the first issue, where our hostage taker sort of self-immolates and bursts into flames, I had said to her, that needs to not look just like fire. It needs to look like extraterrestrial. It's gotta be acidy and weird. So kind of go for it and we'll see where we go. And she sort of did what she was saying was like a first pass at just sort of putting some color down. And I loved it. And then she did what she said was the finished colors, and I didn't like it anymore. And I was like, no, that's too saturated and it's too muddy and messy and there's too much going on there. What you did for the sort of the mock-up, that's actually perfect. Just do that. Just do that. That was ideal. So sometimes I just sort of say to her, look, just experiment with some things, but these are kind of the broader parameters. And other times I'm like very, very, very specific about, no, it's got to be really little and subtle and, you know, I can be a real pain in the ass.
Well, I mean,
particular,
yeah,
looking for is particular.
Yes, very, very particular.
I mean, this one's your baby, so you know it kind of makes sense that you
it know. Really is.
Cable, I think you had a question earlier.
I did not have a question. I had an observation, but the moment's passed. It's fine.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right.
We've had a few people in the chat asking if there's actual Pinterest page for witches, and we're like, and yes, there are. There are a lot.
Sure, there are. Yeah.
Oh, there is a
Pinterest.
There is a lot. I think witch Pinterest could be its own thing.
Its own website, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think I've lost my chat connection because I'm not seeing any new questions. So you guys are going to have to take over from there.
There are a couple old questions. One is, do you have a favorite type of scene to paint? Landscape, conversation between characters, action, etc.?
Oh, look, probably my favorite is sort of emotionally loaded conversations. But if that was all I was drawing, I'd get real bored really quickly.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's what I like about comics so much is that it requires variety, you know. An establishing shot, regardless of what it is, whether it's a forest or a city or whatever, can often be sort of daunting. It's kind of my least favorite thing to embark on, but it's almost always my favorite thing to have achieved because I can look at it and just go, wow, look at that. You know, you've just created a whole world there. And I love the sort of minutiae of the detail, you know, whether it's a domestic setting, which I think is probably my favorite to do, sort of, you know, the inside of someone's home, because you can throw in all kinds of sort of character-based Easter eggs. That's probably my favorite to do, but, you know, it's the variety. You know, if I were just drawing sort of fight scenes all the time, I'd be the most bored person on the planet. But, you know,
doesn't provide
a fight scene once or twice an issue is actually pretty fun.
I had someone send a message and ask, how much is Rowan's cat based on your cat?
Attitude-wise, probably quite a bit at the moment. But the cat that I have now is not the cat that I had when we started. My old pussycat died. But, yes, our current cat, Periwinkle, she's asshole. She's lovable and she's adorable, but she's a fucking asshole. And
so we're all cats if they're doing it right.
Not quite. Hawthorne's quite sort of loyal as well as an asshole.
Right. Well, the most loyal people usually are.
Exactly.
Because they're telling you what you don't. They're telling you what you need to hear, even though you don't want to hear it.
100%.
Yeah. So is there? See, I want to ask you, like, if there's something you can tease us coming out on Black Magick, but I also know the answer is no, because that's not how comics work.
No. Not really. there's a lot of the CEO. So the CEO is our sort of head demon character that we introduce at the very end of our first little story arc at the end of issue 5. And she reappears a couple of times in the second half of that volume. And she's the one that sort of freezes time and takes Morgan's newborn baby hostage for a bit. She's quite the player in this arc, and she's a really fun bitch of a character to draw. She's if anyone's a fucking asshole, it's her. And she pops up a lot, which is kind of fun because she's there to really give Rowan a hard time.
I was gonna ask, is it fun to draw someone that's just so nasty? Like, I can imagine you the whole time, like, oh God, you're so awful.
Yeah, she's such a bitch. And I was gonna say an Australian very familiar C word. No, she's a.
You can get away with it here. It's fun. We know you're Australian.
Oh, good.
It'll be fine.
Yeah, no, but she's sort of also just so cool as a cucumber all the time. You know, not a lot gets to her because she's the mastermind, really, in this story. She's the one pulling the strings. And so the dynamic that sort of starts to evolve between her and Rowan is really interesting. It's really fun. So I suppose that's a big fat tease without being too specific.
That's good work.
That's good work. And then I realized we've had you on for almost 90 minutes. That might be a good little tease.
Shit. Yeah.
No, that's about how long we do the show. And I was like, oh man, we just keep yammering on and on in the best way possible.
That's all right. I talk too much.
No, that's usually my job. Ask anyone. So issue 12 came out last week.
Yes.
So are you guys on a 5-week schedule? Is that how this one's going?
No, I don't think so. I think
or?
I don't know. I think it's like the last Wednesday of the month. That's what we used to be on. I'm pretty sure that's what we're on now. It's like the last sort of new comic book day of the month.
Okay.
For these 5 issues. And then after that, I'm not 100% sure because neither Greg or I are 100% sure of our workloads over the next few months. But hopefully it won't be another giant wait before the next 5 issues come out.
I definitely know.
We don't want to be doing this when we're 60. This is getting ridiculous.
Right.
Come on.
I definitely know readers don't want to wait that long again. And I would lump myself in that.
I mean, we will,
They
but we don't
will.
want to.
Yeah, right. By the time issue 16 comes out, we will be halfway through our story.
Okay. Wow.
Okay.
Well, Nicola, thank you so much for popping on the show this week. It was so amazing to talk to you.
That's a pleasure, guys. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and hopefully when everyone can travel again, we can get you back out to Rose City sometime, or
that'd be
find
nice.
a way for us to go visit a show out there. Either way,
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, cool. Well, Nicola, thank you so much. I'm going to let you pop off there, or
Thanks for having me, everyone.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
It was great talking with you.
Take
Thank you.
care.
All
See
right.
you next time.
Yep. The Zoom always makes the sign off so weird.
Oh, yeah. It helps if you change the settings so that you don't have to confirm you want to leave. I'm like, yes, I asked to leave. Don't ask me, just do it.
Multiple times.
Yes, but you can turn
Do
it
the
off, and that
thing.
makes a difference. And then it's just the awkward pie.
That was awesome. That was amazing.
Yeah, she's always really great to talk to.
Yeah.
Denise, to answer your question from earlier, the thing that I was going to point out was that an argument could be made that almost all artists who work in all mediums, some of them can be looked at as magic users or spellcrafters, because there's a difference between creating art and there's a difference between creating art that immediately invokes emotion, feeling, and grabs someone, and those are people who are clearly the D&D spellcrafters.
I
sorcerers,
definitely
the
agree with
wizards.
that.
And that can be, and I don't limit it just to artists or visual artists like painters, illustrators, but to writers, to sculptors, to musicians. Because you can find that type of spellcraft in every art medium.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you. That you can be a creator, but that doesn't necessarily. And I mean, it's different for different people, like just because, something that Nicola draws evokes emotion in me doesn't necessarily mean everyone feels that way. For other people, they might have a different, handful of artists which give them those vibes.
Right.
Yeah.
Few and far between are the artists that can reach the masses with that.
Just universally magical in their works.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Next week, Cable, do we have we were talking about a guest for next week? Or am I getting dates wrong?
have not confirmed.
Okay.
So
because we're on a roll, man.
I will keep you posted.
Fantastic.
But if we do not, I also have subscribed and backing that other thing that I was talking about. So I'm going to send an email off this week, maybe even this evening, to someone else.
You've got someone's phone number anyway.
I do. Which is so weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, I also I'm going to start out by emailing them.
Sure. Right.
You'll all be copied in. Maybe
make sure you drop that Trek in the Park connection.
Oh, I'm 100% I'm going to do that. I'm going to actually send one of the photos that we're both in together.
Oh, that's right. Kind of gives away what we're talking about, but it's fine.
Hopefully, maybe we can make it a 2-for-1.
That'd be cool.
I think so. I think
Shoot
it would
for the
be
moon.
fun. I think it'd be fun to have both of them on, and I've listened to so far one episode of their podcast, and I'm going to listen to the other.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah, it is. And they just like to sit around and shoot the shit and talk about nonsense like we do. So
right. Well, here's hoping. And with that, I think we should wrap up the show this week. Does that work?
That's totally fine with me. This I'm struggling to focus today.
Yeah, well, it's because you've been doing too much of your drops.
Yes. Accidentally taking 10 doses of edibles really messes you up, guys.
That also sounds glorious at the same time.
It kind of does.
So it's a particular extract that I purchased because
womp womp.
I was looking for something to help with sleep. And while I did not get to sleep any sooner than normal, I slept real hard. And most of the day I've been only like 80, let's say it's like 70% awake and like cognizant of what's going on.
Enjoy that.
And I've been hungry all day. Like literally, I just wanted to do nothing but eat all day. I'm barely awake, just like shoveling yogurt-covered pretzels in my mouth.
Just imagining you on the couch, like summoning Christian, like, honey, food.
Seriously, I've had like 4 meals today, plus snacks.
Good for you.
I don't know about good.
You know what? For one day, it's fine. Because the world is hot garbage. So enjoy
really
today.
Is. And I definitely got that sleep I wanted. So
I plan on going to sleep damn near as soon as we end this show.
Well, all right then.
All right then. Well, with that.
On that note,
I'm Aaron Duran.
I'm Bina Rita.
And I'm Cable Hashitani.
And one more huge thanks to Nicola Scott for chatting on us this week. And as always, Tear Gas Ted, fucking resign. Bye, everybody.
Bye.